Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's session on enhancing net revenue management with AI and ML. My name is Liz McCreesh. I'm a principal data and AI consultant at Thorogood. I'll be taking you through the session today. So just a run through of what we're going to cover in today's session. So we'll just talk through some of the fundamentals underpinning the NRM process. We'll talk about how we can use ML and AI to automate and augment some of the data that's used in NRM. And then we're going to talk through a couple of business use cases. So we're going to look at promotion effectiveness, shelf space analytics, and SKU or product optimization across your portfolio. We'll just do a very quick wrap up. And then for those of you who aren't familiar with Thorogood, I'll give you a little bit of information about us. So let's get started then. So in terms of net revenue management, I'm sure you're all very familiar with it. And the aim of today's session isn't to go through NRM in a lot of detail. We're just going to cover off some of the basics and then show how AI and ML can enhance the process. So as we've got on the screen here, there are kind of 5 main levers underpinning NRM. So the first one is, how do we price our products? The second is where we're looking to maximize what we're selling in different channels and what we're selling makes sense in each channel. Number 3 is the mix management. So what do we sell where and alongside what other products? 4, we're looking at promotions. So how, what, when, where do we offer our promotions? And then the final one is around trade terms. So how we're dealing our relationships with retailers. I'm just putting up this slide here because I know that we talk about AI and quite often at the minute in the last few years, there's been a lot of talk about LLMs and ChatGPT. I really wanted to put this slide up just to reiterate that AI encompasses more than just language models. So we've got things like machine learning, which allows you to do different algorithms and pass your data through on a regular basis. We've talked about the chat and some of the language processing. More and more now being able to take image recognition and take images and pull information from that, taking more autonomous information and automating things like that. And then speech recognition. So we're all very familiar now with our Teams meetings getting recorded and then the transcripts getting shared and summarized. It's becoming more and more a part of day-to-day life. But I just want to show some of these different aspects of it to show that, AI has got quite a broad spectrum. And depending on what your business case is, one or more of these may be applicable, and it doesn't have to just be ChatGPT and LLMs. So I think one of the main things when you're talking about NRM is, understanding of the data that's needed to facilitate the process. I think everyone's obviously very familiar with their own internal data, but then we need to also take in external data, whether that's syndicate data or point of sale data. What we'll show as well is that we can now do more attribution of data. So extending the information that's there. So giving us a wider and richer set of attributes to deal with. Underpinning all of this, and I think I said the word underpinning a lot recently, is the quality of the data. So it's kind of garbage in, garbage out. So in order to be sure that you're making the right decision, you need to be sure that you've got the confidence in the data that you're bringing in. And I think with the latest sets of data and AI and embellishment of data, there is a wider source available. And we'll kind of touch on some of those on some of the later slides. I'm not going to dwell too much on this slide because it's kind of some of the kind of factors you need to consider when you're pulling in data from different sources together to give you a reliable and consistent picture. None of these are new issues. I think they've been around since time began, but just to be aware that we may have different ways and techniques of handling these with the different tools that are now available to us. What I am going to do is focus in on one of these. So just this mapping to common dimensions and show how some of the tools and techniques available can be used to facilitate that. Here we've got a business case where we've got our own internal product hierarchy, which is how our business users and data analysts like to see the data and are familiar with it. But then if we're pulling in data from multiple external retailers, then they're going to have different consistencies in terms of level of granularity, different descriptions compared to what we have in our hierarchy, and a completely different set of coding. So to try and bring all that data together so you can get that complete picture, it can be a little bit daunting on how to bring that in. So as I mentioned before, the codes are different, descriptions could be different levels of hierarchies. And if you try to do that manually, that's quite a long and painstaking job. And that's where the AI and ML come into play. So if we're bringing our data together, the first thing to do is, do we have a like for like match? So do we have ABC and ABC? That's our nirvana of matching things together. It mightn't be an exact that match coming in. So we start doing little things like just trimming off any white space, getting rid of gaps, things like apostrophes, commas, full stops, dashes, anything that might cause a difference between one system and the other. And we can also start bringing in things like certain abbreviations that we know, like LTD versus limited. So we can do some work there around bringing in some synonyms that we've seen come up in the past that have meant that we can see why a mapping hasn't automatically taken place. Once we've got that, we're still be left with some matches that aren't actually made. And here we can start using some algorithms to do some similarity matching. And where that will do things like it'll be where there is one letter difference, it'll either check if you add, remove or replace a letter, do we then have a match? And what it will do is it'll give us that result. And it'll also give us a confidence factor of how likely it is that it is the same word coming through. And then for what's left, we can start using those LLMs, the large language models, and it will start looking at other information that we've given it about the product. You know, it could be the size, the color, different attributes, and it will try and match based on those. I mean, as you can appreciate, the first match is the simplest one. Then we're getting a bit of an algorithm, and then we're getting much more sophisticated with the LLMs. So that's probably doing the most work by the time you get to that level 3. Those percentages are just indicative depending on the quality of your data and kind of what you're looking at. That may change over time as well. As you get more and more of your synonyms in level 1, you might be getting a higher match. So over time, you can start building up a better initial match. And in this scenario here with this customer, we used a combination of GPT, Databricks and Microsoft Azure to enable this matching process. Those particular technologies and tools aren't set in stone. You could quite easily swap one out for another technology. That's one of the things we also try to do when we're developing these systems. At some point, GPT may be not the most cost effective. And if you wanted to swap that component out, we try to build the solutions in such a way that that's not an onerous task to do. So over time, you can look at the cost effectiveness of what you're doing and replace it for a smaller or larger model, depending on your data sets as needs be. And as much as we do love our ML and AI, they don't always get it right. So what we would also recommend is having some kind of way of overriding any mappings and just having that human kind of eyeballing across the system just to see where if you've got maybe a lower percentage of confidence and just double check some of those mappings. Or if you look at your data, quite often what will happen is you'll see something come through in the front end on your reporting or dashboards, and that'll give you an indication that something's not quite right. So you can come back to the mapping tool and do a cross check and override. So that was our first example for mapping common dimensions. Another one I'm going to do now is still looking around data per se, not necessarily NRM specific, is looking at enriching the data that we've got available to do our analysis on. So the background to here is that, you know, we've got our product hierarchies and we've got our normal attributes. But what if we want to start doing a bit more and doing a bit more groupings of our products? And there's a wealth of information available on the websites here. So here we've got an example. We've got Tesco's website, could be Amazon, could be anything. And we've got a lot of textual information here about our product. So if we've want to think of new ways to attribute the data or kind of new ways to identify segments, here we might want to be able to identify natural shampoos versus non-natural shampoos. And this would enable us to do some analysis. We think there is a market, there is maybe a trend for people moving to more natural, but at the minute it's just a gut feel. We've got no data to support that theory. So what we can do is to start looking at these lengthy product descriptions that are on the website, not just for our products, but for competitor products as well, and try to have a look and see if we can actually classify them into natural and non-natural. If you try to do this manually, you go cross-eyed trying to get through all that information, but it's not a hard and fast rule. We're not just looking for the word natural or non-natural. It's more deriving the information from the descriptions that we've got available. So for this particular bottle of shampoo, some of the kind of things that are popping up here are apple cider vinegar, which feels natural, free from. Also, again, we put that in the natural camp. And what we would do then is want to build up a model and train it to identify these natural versus non-natural splits. And the way we did this was we used open source models and used that text classification to feed that into some pre-trained LLMs. Technology-wise, what we did, we used Hugging Face to identify some of the just different text classification modules that were available. And then we used Databricks, and for this particular customer, AWS was their cloud provider. So we used a combination of those to come up with the solution. Again, not wedded to any of these. We could swap any of these out as and when's needed, depending on how times have changed. And again, we've got a human confirmation and a human cross-checking across the outputs. So just a way to go through and say, actually, yes, we're happy with that one. We confirm that classification is correct. And again, you can see here we've got those confidence levels that give us a feeling of whether we want to go and just do a double check. So I mentioned earlier about the data and the wealth of data we've got available. So, we're used to having our internal data, getting some data from syndicated sources or maybe the point of sale data. But we've got wider data available now. So survey data, we've done quite a lot of work for clients pulling in information from survey data and looking at some of the feedback and maybe switching and the drivers for switching. So that's always very useful to then take that back in-house and combine that with your other internal data. Other information we've seen, we're working with a client who owns some large kind of shopping malls and looking at the full data and the data that comes from connecting up to the Wi-Fi and seeing which stores people are going into can be also added in. Understanding where you're looking at certain stores, what the demographics around that are, can also be fed in to any campaigns. Obviously social media, we're all so used to being on our phones and getting information through. But a trend that we are seeing with clients is spending more of their marketing spend specifically on social media. So targeting campaigns, maybe uses for products that mightn't have been originally thought of, but then start trending and increasing sales and showing how the products can be used in new ways. Obviously, internal supply chain data is coming in, and then looking at occasions so where people are shopping. I know that myself, I'll do a mix of shopping online on the retailer's online store, on Amazon, maybe a whoosh short-term delivery or a big weekly shop getting delivered to my door. So there's a variety of different channels that we're all interacting with, and the data and understanding how that data fits together can be very powerful. So now we've got our data, or we're assuming we've got our data in place. So how can we look at some of the business use cases that kind of help to drive some of those levers that we saw on the first slide? So the first one we're going to look at is promo effectiveness. And you can see that kind of underpins a number of the levers within NRM. So here what we want to really do is understand the impact of our promotions on our performance and try to understand those drivers a bit more, both so we can understand what's happened, but also we can optimize future promotions. So apart from the traditional data we've got coming in here, maybe we're starting to get visual merchandising. We can pull that information in. Is there any video information? Also could be from the social media. What are the kind of hits on that? And also feed that in with our traditional kind of internal sales information. A number of things we'd be looking at. So looking at what's happened in the past, looking at what our forecasts are, looking at our base forecasts, and then doing our forecasting to see what the effect of the promotion would be. So it helps us to really look at the different factors that are in place. Also, we can have a look and see whether we think actually this promotion is going to have a big uptake. And then we can let the demand planning team know that we think there will be more of that product needed based on our predictions. A couple of the factors that we've called out here are just things that we need to consider when we're looking at our promotions. So price elasticity and cannibalization. So different products will have different price elasticities and, certain categories will be more responsive than others, but we need to understand that in order to understand what the effect of that price will have. We tend to use clustering techniques to group different products together to understand how that behavior is. And again, the impact might be different depending on what channel you want to apply that promotion to. To do this, we use a number of different regression techniques together just to understand all the price elasticity and what the impact could have. And again, where you're increasing sales on one part, it might have a negative effect or a cannibalization effect on other products. So we want to try and model that in as well, using a combination of regression and some unsupervised learning. And then we can start playing about with our promos and kind of seeing where we're going to have the least impact on our other products. Or is that cannibalization worth it because we've got a higher margin on the other product? So there's just factors to consider when you're setting up your promotion. So we did this for a client, and as part of our deliverable, we had a suite of dashboards that allowed them to look at the different factors on the promotion, what predictions there were, what the impact had been. And because it was all in one place and kind of set out in a very intuitive way to answer specific questions that they had, the time for analysis and, taking part of that promotion planning was reduced by 40%. And they also saw a 20% improvement on the effectiveness of the promotions as they had that data at their fingertips, meant that they were much more able to see what was happening and get that quicker response and take action. Just some of the specific questions that the different dashboards answered are here on the screen. But I think the importance was that we had the data quality check data coming in, confidence in that data, confidence in understanding how the models were running and what was the factors were being included in it. So there was a real understanding and kind of acceptance of the data in the dashboards. Next, I'm going to look at some shelf space analytics. So here we want to understand where placing a product on the shelf impacts the sales really, and what we would do in terms of working with the retailers to agree where on the shelf our product should be and what the impact would have. So again, here we've got more information. So we've got our historical sales information. Here we were looking at sales by product or SKU and by store, by week. And here we're taking in our sales information, but also including planogram information, which helps us understand what the shelf placement is. And we can look at the effect of that. So we then modeled that and helped us kind of understand what the impact is of moving those products on different positions. And it helps us to have a better discussion with the retailer and understanding the pros and cons and the costs or promotions that might be applicable. So we've all been in a supermarket and looked at the shelves, and the kind of positioning of the shelves have been grouped into some buckets, which are fairly intuitive. So the easiest thing to do is to grab something between grab level and eye level. I'm quite short, so anything on that top shelf is kind of a no-no for me. I can't get to it. So just kind of thinking about where you're going to put those products and what the impact will be. So here we had a number of data points going in, including the store, the product information, position, price, etc., other products available. We then developed some models to give us a prediction for our average weekly sales. When you put stuff in, get stuff out, it can be hard sometimes with that black box approach for the business to really buy into the impact of it. So we used the SHAP model to help us interpret the results or understand what those drivers are. Then we also did a little proof of concept about creating a little what if tool that would allow managers to change some of those parameters and see what the impact would be on the sales coming out through our model. So just to give a little bit of a descriptor, this is the output from the SHAP model. So here we can see the different attributes and data points that we're feeding in for this particular SKU and store combination. We can see some of them are having positive impact, some of them are having a negative impact. But overall, what we're saying is for this particular combination, we're predicting 2.1 sales of units per week, as opposed to the average down here, which is 1.788. So the position that we've got it in is actually giving it a boost for sales prediction for that week. And I mentioned we did a little prototype, not the most beautiful looking form, but it did allow them to do was to play about with some of these parameters. So for that particular product in that store, if they changed the position on the shelf, they could then run the model through again, and it would predict what the revised sales prediction would be based on those parameters. And finally, I'm going to just quickly look at some SKU or product portfolio optimization. So again, here our objective is to simplify the product range that we've got on offering. Makes life a lot easier, makes the manufacturing more simple, but also there are products that are basically either not growing or giving us a poor margin. We'd rather replace them with other products that would give us a better implication. So a number of factors that go in here for these recommendations. So obviously we're looking at things like margin, we're looking at sales value, sales volume, growth, trending, information, and feeding that through to understand actually what we would recommend to delist. Some things that need to be considered in here. There's probably some guardrails that need to go in. So anything that's a newly launched product, which wouldn't have very much sales to date, should be excluded from the analyses. I think some other things we factor in, like you can say get rid of an entire brand or get rid of a whole product line. There's some just things that help into that recommendation tool. And then basically what we then saw is we took our data, we clustered products together based on a number of factors. We did some forecasting. We then grouped the sets of data, looked at some of the key features I mentioned, margin and growth, etc. Go through the modeling and reclassify the data, and then surface that information to the users so they can quite quickly see what we're recommending to delist. And then as time goes on and data changes and month, because you've got your model set up, you can do that more frequently. So what might have been historically, twice a year activity can become much more frequent as it's all automated and goes through the model. And again, technology underpinning this, in this circumstances, we're using a mix of Databricks, Azure, and then Power BI for visualizing the data in dashboards. So that's all I was planning on going through today. I was, very, very high level, just giving you an idea of some of the areas to consider. But I think some of the key takeaways is, data. You've got to have the right data at the right level with the right combination where you're integrating data, ensuring that is robust. You've got good data quality. You've got a level of data governance. But also, I think hopefully I've brought out that apart from just your traditional internal and point of sale data, there is now a wider range of data that's being made available, partially because it can now be interpreted by the AI and ML, but also because with the cloud technologies that are available, you can scale up much more and have a wider set of data and a much more granular set of data available for your analyses. With AI and ML, we've seen cases where someone's on their objective is to deliver an AI solution. We don't think that's the right way to go about it at all. You have to look at what your business use case is and see if AI and ML could help to either automate something or enhance the process rather than doing it for the sake of ticking an AI box. It's more about how can these different tools and techniques be used to improve your process and add value. That might be just because you've automated it into a model that you can do something more frequently or at a more granular level or at a wider scale. So it's just something you need to think about. Where could that add value to your current processes? And then the optionality. So I think through that, you've seen a few different technology vendors that we've used their software and different techniques, different vendors. So think about as you're getting your systems built out, how easy is it to switch out from different vendors as over time the cost and the speed and the need will change. So it's just something definitely to keep in mind when you're working through some of these solutions. And then just a little bit about Thorogood for those of you who don't know us. We're a global data and AI consultancy. So we've got offices in the Americas, Brazil, Singapore, India, and I'm based out of our London office. For us, hopefully I've come across it, it's always the business need or the business focus or the business issue that is the main thing for us. But obviously underpinning that is understanding the data that's available or could be made available, what the technology can do. And then it's coming together, all of those three together to give you a solution that meets your business needs and will provide business insight. We do offer end-to-end solutions. So we'll do strategy and roadmaps. We'll do support after we've delivered solutions. And we also do training as well on different tools and technologies. So thank you for your time today. As I said, my name is Liz McCreesh. Do feel free to reach out if you do have any questions. I know we've kind of just touched the surface on a lot of topics this afternoon. So if you want to do a deep dive in any of those areas, please do reach out and have a great rest of the day.